It's not going to happen. This thing that we're talking about, the church growing, is not going to happen. The only way this is going to happen is if the pastor sees himself or herself in a different light, and it goes like this. Do you know Batman? The series, remember that old series? I have a newer version of it too. But what we need to be is a little bit less like, as pastors, a little bit less like Batman and a little bit more like Alfred. Remember Alfred? Alfred was the guy who, when Batman came back in, he would tend to his wounds, he would give him a pep talk and help him out and send him back out into the world. And that's what I think pastors really ought to be more like. Rather than the superheroes themselves going out into the world and conquering everything. And here's the modern equivalent is The Incredibles. What's her name? The woman who makes the garments. Edna. She makes the garments for all the superheroes, and she's like, it's a darling. She says, it's 1,000. It's good up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and new for this year, it's machine washable. And so we need to be more, as pastors, more like Edna, more like the one who is helping leaders to succeed. And I think that for us, we're not going to get where we want to go without a different way of leading. And that's going to be also a big focus of mine, to think of we need pastors who are going to be adaptable, pastors who, it used to be understood that what you were to do was to be a chaplain to people and to serve them and to meet their needs and to spend the time in your study preparing your next sermon. That can't be the only thing that we're doing anymore. Maybe it never was, but especially now, we need pastors who are going to be willing to lead, just like I've been doing here this morning, to say, here's the 70% rule. Can we try that? Can we take a look at this book, Growing Young? In our synod, we have also a group of churches that are a cohort called Mosaics, which is an effort to grow in more diverse ways. And we're getting leadership from a couple of pastors who have grown very large, very multi-ethnic congregations, one in Ohio and one in Arkansas. And they're going to help the team of leaders think through some steps that they can take to become more multi-ethnic. And so you can be a part of that. And that requires leadership. It takes somebody to say, here's what I think we should try. How does this sound to you? And bring people along. That's what we need now. People who are faithful. You need pastors and leaders, all of us, who are versed in the Word, who are transformed by Christ and faithful people. All of that's true. But I think with God's help, I know we can do it. It's just going to be like canoeing the mountains for a while. And that's going to feel kind of weird. One of those scenes in my mind, Merriweather, his first name is Merriweather, right? Post, right? No, Lewis, Merriweather Lewis, right? So he was, they had to hoist their horses over a cliff that they were climbing. And they had to get their horse, at this point they were on horse, but they had no way to get over, so they had to, with block and tackles, hoist their, so if you think of Lewis and Clark as just kind of gently, that's not at all what this was. It was very, very difficult and very challenging. And I suspect that will be some of what we are going to experience too. But that's also where the fun is. And the adventure and the hope for the future. I do think it's possible that the churches will grow again. And some are. And the churches that are growing right now tend to be charismatic. And by that I mean churches that present a certain kind of an experience of God. I think what some of what younger people are looking for right now is not just the information about God, like the belief system. That they can look up online. But they want an experience of what God is like. To be transformed by a mystery. That we have. Like that for us is Eucharist. Every Sunday, we just don't talk about it that way anymore. We're on autopilot, right? We take it not for granted, maybe we do a little bit. That could be unpacked a lot and offered with a certain kind of sacredness that really does not demand, but it would allow it maybe to speak to people in a new way.
So in that same vein, I also have 3 young adults.
Uh-huh.
And I think that this generation really can sniff out inauthenticity and hypocrisy.
Yep.
And when you talk about the conservative right or the Catholic Church or even some of the mega churches led by these big personalities that have now fallen by scandal,
Yes.
they just see the church as, as a big hypocrisy. And but what I do see motivating youth today is a lot of social justice. So how do you see the ELCA on a macro level or national level, as well as individual churches? Is that sort of a hornet's nest, or because the church has been very involved in social justice historically?
So that's also part of our unit is advocacy, right? We have an advocacy office in Washington and a small one at the United Nations. And Amy Ruman heads that up here in Washington. And we have a huge Lutheran Services of America is also in the Methodist building on Capitol Hill. And that's we relate to, I forget the number, it was given to me, but it's a staggering number of social ministries across the country. What's happened is that those efforts have been separated from faith in a way that I think no longer helps to build the church, and in fact, in some ways, can be counterproductive for us. And so, because if you're not careful, advocacy, you can just become one more noisy gong out there, just pounding a drum for justice. And it's not related to the compassion of Christ. It is for us, but if we don't make that link, it won't be made by others.
And they don't see the church as standing for anything.
No, that's right. And I think we can do that. We can build that link between them. But one caution is that we used to do the hypothermia shelter too at Bethlehem. And doing good works in themselves is not going to do it. Like, I heard of this club at the local high school in Chantilly. In Chantilly. There was an atheist club that was formed by the students, and they got recognition. And you know what's the first thing they did? They had a service project. I just think that's very telling, right? And so kids can do service. They go to Greenpeace, and there are people who do that actually a lot better than the church does, and they can find avenues for that. What we want to do is say that is the church, but we want to point them back to the one who has inspired us to do that in the first place.
Phil, that is a major issue among at least this congregation. We can get 75 people, maybe 100 people to deliver groceries and do hypothermia but when it's to go out and I shouldn't say advertise, I guess, but at least let people know that Emmanuel is available and present and what we have to offer. We might get 2 people. Mm-hmm. There is a major difference. To do good works is easy for people, but to profess our beliefs and try to grow the diversity, because one of our objectives is to go into community, but we don't know how to do that very well. And we need a lot of training. If we're ever to develop diversity, we're going to have major training to do that, because even in the pews, if there's somebody that looks differently, very few times will people take the effort because they're uncomfortable. Not that they wouldn't want to, they just are uncomfortable because they don't look like us, and so therefore it's easier to turn to a friend and talk, mm-hmm. versus identifying and specifically going over and introducing yourself. And
This is universal. This is, yeah, it is a universal truth. And people always huddle together with people that you know, and you need to be intentional about reaching out to beyond your circle of friends that you already know. And so, again, this is teaching. It's telling people, there are all kinds of clever little things to remind people, like for the first 2 minutes after the service, I forget what that's called, but for the first 2 minutes after the service, talk to 2 people you haven't met before. And look first for somebody new. But the trick is you can overdo that, right? And then it can be like, oh, this person's new, and 12 people go to say hello to them. You don't want that, but you also don't want to ignore them either. The worst thing that happens is somebody goes to church, and maybe you've done this as a visitor. You've gone to a church, and not one single person says a word to you. Not one person turned. In that church that I was telling you about that's very multi-ethnic, I went to their church on Sunday morning. I sat down, and you know how you do this? You kind of sit down, and I just sat there, and I could tell the person next to me was looking at me. And so I turned, and you know what she said? Good morning. Like, it wasn't weird. It was just normal. It was like, oh, this is a nice place. She said, good morning. She said, are you new here? Are you a part of this group? This is a very normal conversation. But we have to be, that happened because that church has spent a lot of time talking about that. It's a Methodist church, by the way. Yeah.
Interesting. So, well, first of all, thank you for coming very much. This is really great, especially on your last day preaching. So one of my questions, I have 2 questions. Yeah. One of them sort of related to that. First one is, you talked about, I think you were talking about getting back to the roots of our faith and grounding the church in that, making sure that what we do is grounded in that. So the first question is there anything that churches are doing that you think has been effective in restoring or in reviving their interest in their faith and drawing them back to the core? The second question is, as you're leaving, and you've been dealing with 75 churches for 10 years, I want to follow up on Fred's question about the 20%, what makes them successful. What do you think in this synod, is there anything that you've seen that churches are doing that you would think that every church should consider doing? Or do you think it's more the churches that seem to be successful are the older, successful congregations, they have good pastors, they have a thriving population nearby, and it's maybe more of a matter of not chance, but it's circumstance, do you think?
No, I no longer think anything is dictated by circumstance. That's very rare. There are some places, even in our synod, where there are cornfields and new churches that we're putting up there, but they only flourish if they have the right, starting with the right leaders who are there, the pastor who's focused in the right way. And it's 2 things. One is having that pastor who is adaptive in the ways that we've been talking about and faithful, and a core group of lay leaders who together decide we want to focus on the church reaching out to people who are not yet a part of us. In other words, we want to help the church to see if we can figure out a way to grow. And then there are some, and I did a talk on this, and you can Google it. It's on our synod website, I think. It was called the top 10 things that our churches in our synod are doing to grow, and then some of them are just very mundane things that churches that do them, they tend to grow, and churches that don't grow as much. Having a great website. Websites now are the new front doors of the church. Nobody's going to come in here before they check out your website first. Just true. They're going to see, what's this place like? Is it friendly? Is it going to be too friendly? Like, what can I expect when I come? That should be a part of that website. And then when they come in, is there a way to get to know them? What is gently? Churches that grow are clear about what the next step is that somebody would take if they wanted to become connected to your church. And that might be something as simple as it's just a message to first-time guests who are with us. We don't call them visitors because visitors come and go, or guests may come and go. Newcomers is the word, right? Newcomers. There'll be more. And some follow-up, like how can you get their information? There are some clever ways to do that, but I think the most important thing is having that next step for them. And so it might be, like this morning when you were talking about the hypothermia shelter, what I would suggest is say, and if you're a guest with us, if you're a newcomer with us this morning, and we would love for you to be a part of our hypothermia shelter this year too. Here's how you can be a part of it. And then be very specific. Here's how you do that. And then you use that time to build a relationship with them. So, I mean, if they come and spend the night, then you have a whole night to get to know that person. It's huge. That's a tremendous opportunity to build a relationship with somebody. That's how it happens, is through those relationships. So there's a whole lot of things that I've noticed about the churches that are growing. But if you don't have the right pastor and the right lay leader together, decided that this is going to be a focus, you don't even have a chance. If you have that, then you have a chance to do some of those other things.
Well, we could use 2 hours with, or probably many days in this regard, but I wanted to spend the last 5 minutes talking about. The council has spent many times talking about many of these issues, and in the new bylaws, it talks about a leadership team. And Phil has referred on several sentences this morning about how leadership is crucial. And so I wanted to announce today that a leadership team has been formed by the council that is required in the new bylaws to identify, recruit, train leaders at Emmanuel. It is envisioned that we would create a formal leadership institute that will continually train and develop leaders here at Emmanuel. And if we were successful, it could be outside Emmanuel for the Synod or East Coast or whatever. We think big in our visions here. The research is very clear that purposefully developing leaders is a critical component of a growing church. It is felt that the local church is the key element of hope of the world. It starts with one church, and its future rests primarily in the hands of its leaders. Churches can no longer wait for leaders to spontaneously appear, like we most of the time. Oh, who's going to be a leader? All right, you be a leader. And we have not given them the tools and the training to do that. Leaders must be trained. Bill Hybels, a pastor and a national author on leadership in the church, states that strong leadership is often viewed as one of the most important keys to organizational growth, change, and renewal. And although there are over 350 definitions of leadership, Bill Hybels states that a leader brings people together around a common purpose and moves them to commit time, energy, resources, and creativity to achieve that purpose. And that's really what we're all about. Great leaders create other leaders. It doesn't keep it with the same leaders, but we grow leaders through others' leadership. And that is what we want to do at Emmanuel. We know that leadership comes in various forms and roles in any organization. We can all be leaders in some way. At Emmanuel, we see leadership roles at various levels. Leaders that create policy and direction for Emmanuel, for instance, preparing people to be on council other than just be on council in this regard. And we could all use the training in that regard. Leaders to lead teams, ministry performance teams, which are related to spiritual programming, and minister empowerment teams, which are more administrative in nature. But all the leadership is needed. Situational leaders that are called to chair a group to resolve an issue that needs immediate attention. That is a different type and form of leadership. And leadership from the pew, as we were just talking about. Leadership in just turning to the new person in the pew, being a model for others to do that. That is leadership into itself. So leadership starts in the pew and all the way up to counsel and working with the pastor. We have only had our inaugural meeting, so we are very much at the beginning of this process. The leadership team would welcome input from all of you, because we know this must be an initiative that the congregation embraces. It can't be 10 people, it can't be 15 people. It has to be the congregation working together to develop leaders at those various levels that I talked about. Many of our team members are here today, and I would like to introduce the members so that we can have you reach out to each one of them and give your ideas. Tell us what you would like to participate in that would be part of faculty of a certain level, expertise, or just being involved in planning, whatever. We would welcome your ideas. Hunter Jones is here, our president of the congregation, and he certainly is a member. You have to have the president and the leader part of this, or you're done. Pastor Tony, because we know the pastor has to be the facilitator of leadership and has to endorse it. In the past, we have not been together on what it is we're doing, and we have to grow as a unit in there. And we hope to get Maddie involved, of course. Janet Seeley, who is a council member, is on the committee. Amy Cruel in the back there, who is also a council member. Nate Nidison, who is not here today. Fred Hasley is here today. Carl Johnson, who's on the committee. Sherry Schaefer, who's doing other duties during this period of time, who can't be here. Great Stope, who actually was the guy that talked about situational leadership and being formerly of the CIA, which I can say from publicly right now, certainly understands situational leadership in this regard. Again, Phil, thank you for sharing your thoughts and expertise. We certainly will be following you to Chicago. We will be expecting your help and assistance as we move through the process. And he has also offered and suggested a consultant that we're going to be considering that's a consultant to the Senate. And so we'll be looking at that on Wednesday night as to whether to further develop that. I'd like to end with a leadership prayer that I found that I thought was very appropriate. So shall we all bow in prayer? Leadership is hard to define. Lord, let us be the ones to define it with justice. Leadership is like a handful of water. Lord, let us be the people to share it with those who thirst. Leadership is not about watching and correcting. Lord, let us remember it is about listening and connecting. Leadership is not about telling people what to do. Lord, let us find out what people want. Leadership is less about the love of power, and more about the power of love. Lord, as we continue to undertake the role of leader, let us be affirmed by the servant leadership we witnessed in your Son Jesus. Let us walk in the path he has set, and let those who will follow. Let our greatest passion be compassion, our greatest strength, love, our greatest victory, the reward of peace. In leading, let us never fail to follow. In loving, let us never fail. Amen.